Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent their afternoons at the mall or gossiping about boys, she found herself drawn to the local shooting range with her grandfather. The old man, a Vietnam veteran with weathered hands and patient eyes, had taught her everything he knew about firearms. By the time she turned 18, Sarah could outshoot most of the men who frequented the range, but nobody seemed to take her seriously. The decision to join the military came naturally to Sarah. Her grandfather had served with honor, and she felt a calling to follow in his footsteps. However, when she walked into the recruitment office, the sergeant behind the desk looked her up and down with obvious skepticism. She was barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with delicate features that made her look younger than her 18 years. The recruiter spent most of their meeting trying to steer her toward administrative roles or medical training. "You sure you don't want to consider something more suited to your abilities?" the sergeant asked, his tone patronizing. "We have excellent programs for communication specialists or logistics coordinators." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I want to be in combat operations. I want to serve on the front lines." The sergeant chuckled and shook his head. "Look, miss, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but combat roles require physical strength and mental toughness that most people, especially young women, just don't possess. You'd be better off in a support role where you can still serve your country without putting yourself or others at risk." Despite the discouragement, Sarah persisted. She signed up for the infantry program and shipped out to basic training 3 months later. Her grandfather drove her to the airport, his eyes shining with pride even as he worried about the challenges she would face. He pressed something small and hard into her palm before she boarded the plane. "This was your grandmother's," he whispered. It was a small silver cross on a delicate chain. She wore it through World War II when she worked in the munitions factory. It kept her safe then, and it'll keep you safe now. Basic training was everything Sarah expected and more. The physical demands were brutal, but she had prepared herself well. She could run faster and longer than many of her male counterparts, and her small size actually proved advantageous in certain exercises. However, it was on the shooting range where Sarah truly began to shine. The first time the drill instructor handed out rifles for marksmanship training, Sarah felt the familiar weight of a weapon in her hands. The other recruits fumbled with their rifles, struggling to remember the basics of sight alignment and trigger control. Sarah's movements were fluid and natural, born from years of practice with her grandfather. When they moved to the firing line, Sarah's first shot hit dead center of the target. Her second shot landed in nearly the same hole. By the end of the exercise, her target looked like it had been attacked by a single, precise punch rather than peppered with multiple bullets. The drill instructor walked down the line, examining each recruit's target with his usual scowl, but when he reached Sarah's position, his expression changed. "Who shot this target?" he barked. "I did, drill sergeant," Sarah replied, standing at attention. The instructor studied her for a long moment, then looked back at the target. "You sure you didn't have help? Maybe switch targets with someone?" "No, drill sergeant, that's my target." The other recruits began to murmur among themselves. Some seemed impressed, but others appeared skeptical or even resentful. Sarah could hear whispered comments about beginner's luck and show off. She kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral, but inside she felt a familiar frustration building. As the weeks progressed, Sarah's shooting abilities became impossible to ignore. She consistently scored perfect or near-perfect marks on every shooting exercise. Her accuracy with both rifles and pistols surpassed not only her fellow recruits, but many of the instructors as well. Yet despite her obvious talent, she still faced constant doubt and dismissal from her peers and some of her superiors. During one particularly challenging training exercise, the recruits were tasked with hitting targets at increasingly long distances. One by one, her fellow trainees failed to hit the far targets, their shots falling short or wide of the mark. When Sarah's turn came, she adjusted her stance slightly, took a deep breath, and squeezed the trigger. The distant target snapped back as her bullet found its center. "Lucky shot," muttered one of the male recruits behind her. Sarah said nothing, but when the instructor called for another round at an even greater distance, she stepped forward again. This time she hit the target twice in rapid succession, both shots grouping within an inch of each other. The murmurs died down, replaced by a tense silence. After the exercise, a group of recruits confronted Sarah in the barracks. They accused her of somehow cheating or getting special treatment from the instructors. The confrontation grew heated, with several of the men towering over her and raising their voices. Sarah stood her ground, her small frame dwarfed by their bulk but her resolve unwavering. "I earned every one of those shots," she said quietly. "I've been shooting since I was 8 years old. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the drill sergeant." The tension was broken when Drill Sergeant Morrison entered the barracks. He surveyed the scene with his usual stern expression, his eyes taking in the clustered group of agitated recruits surrounding Sarah. Without a word, he ordered everyone to their bunks and lights out. But as the others dispersed, he caught Sarah's eye and gave her an almost imperceptible nod of approval. That night, as Sarah lay in her narrow bunk, listening to the sounds of her fellow recruits settling in for sleep, she thought about her grandfather's words. He had told her that the military would test her in ways she couldn't imagine, but that her true strength would eventually shine through. She fingered the small cross at her throat and wondered if he had been right. So far, it seemed like her abilities only made her more of a target for skepticism and resentment. Little did she know that her reputation was beginning to spread beyond the confines of basic training, and that soon she would face challenges that would test not only her shooting skills but her determination to prove herself in a world that seemed determined to underestimate her at every turn. The graduation ceremony from basic training felt surreal to Sarah. As she stood in formation with her fellow soldiers, she reflected on how much had changed over the past several months. Her body had grown stronger, her reflexes sharper, and her confidence more solid. Yet the whispers and sideways glances from some of her peers reminded her that many still questioned whether she belonged among them. After graduation, Sarah received her assignment to Fort Braxton, a sprawling military installation known for training elite combat units. Her orders specified that she would be joining the 3rd Infantry Division's Specialized Reconnaissance Unit. When she arrived, at the base, she was directed to report to Captain Williams, a stern-faced officer with graying temples and intense blue eyes. The captain looked up from his paperwork as Sarah entered his office and saluted. His gaze swept over her small frame with the same skeptical expression she had grown accustomed to seeing. He gestured for her to sit and opened her file on his desk. "Private Martinez," he began, his voice carrying a hint of disappointment. "I have to admit I was expecting someone different when I requested a sharpshooter for my unit. Your test scores are impressive, but reconnaissance work requires more than just good aim. We operate in hostile territory, often behind enemy lines, where physical strength and endurance can mean the difference between life and death." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though internally she bristled at the familiar dismissal. "Sir, I understand the requirements of the position, and I'm confident in my ability to meet them." Captain Williams leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. "We'll see about that, Private. My unit has a reputation to maintain, and I can't afford to have weak links in the chain. You'll be assigned to Squad Leader Sergeant Jackson's team for initial evaluation. If you can't keep up with the physical demands or if your presence compromises the team's effectiveness, you'll be transferred to a more appropriate assignment." The threat hung in the air between them, but Sarah simply nodded. "Understood, sir." Sergeant Jackson turned out to be a tall, muscular man with dark skin and intelligent eyes. Unlike some of the others Sarah had encountered, he seemed more interested in her abilities than her appearance. He introduced her to the rest of her squad: Corporal Thompson, a wiry man from Alabama with a quick wit and faster reflexes; Private First Class Rodriguez, a stocky soldier from California, who served as the team's communications specialist; and Private Davis, a young man from Ohio, who handled explosives and demolitions. "All right, Martinez," Sergeant Jackson said after the introductions. "I've heard about your shooting skills, and that's impressive, but out here we need soldiers who can do everything. We're going to run you through some exercises to see what you're made of." The first test came the following morning. The squad was tasked with a 20-mile forced march through rough terrain while carrying full combat gear. Sarah knew this would be one of her biggest challenges. Despite her conditioning, she was still smaller than her teammates, and the weight of her equipment represented a larger percentage of her body weight than it did for the men. The march began. Before dawn, with the squad setting out across rocky hills and dense woodland, the pace was grueling from the start, and Sarah could feel the strain on her shoulders and back as her heavy pack seemed to grow heavier with each mile. Her teammates spread out in a loose formation, with Sergeant Jackson setting the pace at the front. By the halfway point, Sarah was struggling. Her breathing had become labored, and she could feel blisters forming on her feet despite her well-broken-in boots. Corporal Thompson dropped back beside her, his expression concerned. "You doing okay, Martinez? You need a break?" Sarah gritted her teeth and shook her head. "I'm fine, Corporal. Just getting warmed up." Thompson grinned at her determination, but stayed close, ready to help if needed. Sarah appreciated the gesture, but she was determined to complete the march without assistance. She adjusted her pack straps, found a rhythm that worked for her shorter stride, and pushed forward. The last 5 miles were agony. Every step sent pain shooting through her legs and back, and her water supply was running dangerously low. But Sarah refused to quit. She thought of her grandfather and all the stories he had told her about pushing through adversity. She thought of every person who had told her she wasn't strong enough or tough enough. Most of all, she thought about proving that she belonged here. When the squad finally reached the finish point, Sarah was the last to arrive, but she arrived under her own power. Her teammates were already resting in the shade, and she could see the mix of surprise and respect in their eyes as she stumbled across the finish line. Sergeant Jackson checked his watch and nodded approvingly. "Not bad, Martinez. You finished. 10 minutes behind the slowest time I'll accept, but you finished. And you did it without complaining or asking for help." The next few days brought a series of additional tests. Sarah excelled at some, like navigation and tactical planning, while struggling with others that required brute strength. But gradually, she began to find her place within the team dynamic. Her small size, which had seemed like such a disadvantage, actually proved beneficial in certain situations. She could move through tight spaces that the larger men couldn't navigate, and her natural stealth made her excellent at reconnaissance. It was during a combat simulation exercise that Sarah truly began to prove her worth. The squad was tasked with infiltrating a mock enemy camp and gathering intelligence without being detected. The exercise was being observed by several senior officers, including Captain Williams, who wanted to see how his new reconnaissance unit performed under pressure. The team moved through the wooded area surrounding the simulated enemy position with careful precision. Sarah found herself naturally falling into the role of advanced scout, her small size and quiet movements allowing her to get much closer to the enemy positions than her teammates could manage. As they approached the target area, she spotted something that made her freeze. Through her binoculars, she could see that the mock enemy had set up additional sentries that weren't marked on their intelligence briefing. The extra guards were positioned in locations that would make the planned approach route extremely dangerous. She signaled for the team to halt and made her way back to Sergeant Jackson's position. "Sergeant, we've got a problem," she whispered. "There are at least 4 additional sentries that weren't in our briefing. If we proceed with the original plan, we'll walk right into them." Jackson took her binoculars and confirmed her observations. He cursed under his breath and began considering their options. The exercise had a strict time limit, and they were already running behind schedule. He was about to call for an abort when Sarah spoke up again. "Sergeant, I think I can get around them. There's a drainage ditch that runs along the eastern side of their perimeter. It's narrow, but I should be able to crawl through it and get close enough to gather the intelligence we need." Jackson studied the terrain and shook his head. "It's too risky, Martinez. If they spot you in that ditch, you'll be trapped with nowhere to go. With respect, Sergeant, I don't think any of the rest of you could fit through that space anyway. I'm the only one small enough to make it work." After a moment of consideration, Jackson made his decision. "All right, Martinez. But you take no unnecessary risks. Get in, get the intel, and get out. We'll cover you from here." Sarah nodded and began making her way toward the drainage ditch. Her heart pounded as she low-crawled through the narrow space, mud and debris clinging to her uniform. The ditch was even smaller than she had anticipated, barely wide enough for her shoulders. but she pressed on. Above her, she could hear the voices of the mock enemy soldiers as they went about their patrol routes. When she reached the optimal position, Sarah carefully raised her head just enough to observe the enemy camp. She memorized the locations of weapons, vehicles, and personnel, noting everything that would be valuable intelligence. Then, just as carefully as she had entered, she began the painstaking process of crawling back to her team's position. The mission was deemed a complete success, with Sarah's intelligence proving crucial to the exercise's objectives. As the squad made their way back to base, she could feel a subtle shift in how her teammates regarded her. The skepticism was being replaced by something that felt like genuine respect. The news came on a Tuesday morning during what should have been a routine training briefing. Captain Williams stood before the assembled soldiers with an expression more serious than usual, his hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the room. Sarah sat with her squad in the third row, her attention focused entirely on their commanding officer's words. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Williams began, his voice carrying across the silent room. "I've just received orders from Division Command. Our unit is being deployed to Operation Desert Shield within the next 2 weeks. This is not a training exercise or a peacekeeping mission. We will be operating in active combat zones where enemy forces are well armed and highly motivated." A murmur rippled through the assembled soldiers. Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but whether from fear or excitement, she couldn't be sure. This was what she had trained for, what she had endured months of skepticism and doubt to achieve. Yet now that the moment was approaching, the reality of it felt overwhelming. The captain continued his briefing, outlining their mission parameters and deployment timeline. Sarah's squad would be part of a larger operation designed to gather intelligence on enemy troop movements and weapons capabilities. Their reconnaissance work would be crucial in helping command plan larger strategic operations. After the briefing, Sergeant Jackson gathered his team in their usual meeting room. The atmosphere was more subdued than normal, with each soldier processing the reality of their upcoming deployment. Jackson studied each of his team members carefully before speaking. "I want you all to know that I have complete confidence in this team," he said. "We've trained hard, and we're ready for this mission. But I also want to be clear about something. Out there, we won't have the luxury of second chances or do-overs. Every decision we make could mean the difference between coming home or not." His eyes settled on Sarah, and she could sense what was coming next. "Martinez, I need to ask you something, and I want a completely honest answer. Are you absolutely certain you're ready for this? Combat operations are different from training exercises. There will be people trying to kill you, and you may have to kill them first. If you have any doubts at all, now is the time to speak up." Sarah felt the familiar weight of skepticism settling on her shoulders. Even after proving herself repeatedly during training, she was still being questioned in ways that her male counterparts weren't. She met Jackson's gaze steadily and kept her voice calm. "Sergeant, I've been ready for this since the day I enlisted. I understand the risks and I'm prepared to face them." Jackson nodded slowly. "Good, because once we're deployed, there's no room for doubt or hesitation." The following 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and final training exercises. Sarah spent long hours at the shooting range, honing her already exceptional marksmanship skills. She also worked extensively with the team's communication equipment and navigation systems, knowing that her versatility could be crucial in combat situations. During one of their final training sessions, the squad was introduced to some of the specialized equipment they would be using in the field. The weapons instructor, a grizzled sergeant with 30 years of experience, laid out an impressive array of rifles and other gear on the tables before them. "Now, most of you will be carrying standard-issue M16 rifles," the instructor explained. "They're reliable, accurate, and familiar. But for certain specialized missions, we have some other options available." He gestured to a sleek black rifle that looked different from the others. "This is a custom precision rifle, modified for extreme long-range accuracy. We call it the Black Talon. It's not standard issue, and frankly, most soldiers don't have the skill level necessary to use it effectively. But for the right shooter in the right situation, it can be an incredibly valuable asset." Sarah found herself staring at the weapon, drawn to its elegant lines and obvious craftsmanship. She could see immediately that it was built for precision, with a high-quality scope and modifications that would enhance accuracy at distances far beyond what standard rifles could achieve. "Can we examine it, Sergeant?" asked Corporal Thompson. "Sure, but be careful with it. That rifle costs more than most of you make in 6 months." The weapon was passed around the group, with each soldier handling it briefly before passing it on. When it reached Sarah, she was immediately struck by how perfectly balanced it felt in her hands. The weight distribution was ideal for her build, and the stock seemed designed for someone with her proportions. "Feels good, doesn't it, Martinez?" the instructor observed, watching her carefully. "Yes, Sergeant. It's beautifully crafted. You know, I've been watching your scores at the range. Your accuracy is exceptional, especially for someone so young. Have you ever done any long-range shooting?" Sarah nodded. "My grandfather taught me to shoot at extended distances when I was younger. We used to practice on his ranch in Texas, sometimes shooting at targets over 1,000 yards away." The instructor's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Is that so? And how did you do with those long shots?" "I was pretty good at it," Sarah replied modestly, not wanting to sound boastful. "Pretty good doesn't cut it with a weapon like this," the instructor said. "This rifle demands perfection. 1 degree off in your aim at 1,000 yards and you'll miss your target by several feet." After the training session ended, Sarah found herself thinking about the Black Talon. There was something about the weapon that appealed to her beyond its obvious quality. It represented the kind of precision and skill that she had always strived for in her shooting. But she also knew that such specialized equipment was typically reserved for the most experienced soldiers. The deployment itself began with a long flight to a forward operating base in the desert. Sarah had never been so far from home, and as she looked out the small aircraft window at the endless expanse of sand and rock below, she felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The landscape looked alien and hostile, nothing like the familiar terrain of her Texas hometown. Upon arrival, the squad was briefed on their first mission. Intelligence indicated that enemy forces were using a network of caves in the nearby mountains to store weapons and coordinate attacks on Allied positions. Sarah's team was tasked with conducting surveillance on the area and gathering detailed information about enemy strength and capabilities. The mission required them to establish an observation post on a ridge overlooking the suspected enemy position. From there, they would monitor activity for several days, documenting everything they observed. It was exactly the kind of work that Sarah's reconnaissance training had prepared her for. As they prepared to depart for their observation post, Sarah noticed that the weapons being distributed were primarily standard-issue rifles. She thought about requesting the Black Talon but hesitated. Despite her proven abilities, she was still the newest member of the team, and she didn't want to appear presumptuous. The trek to their observation post took most of the night, with the squad moving carefully through rocky terrain under cover of darkness. Sarah carried her share of the team's equipment, including communication gear and surveillance equipment. The physical demands were significant, but she had grown stronger during her training and she kept pace with her teammates without difficulty. When they reached their designated position, the squad began setting up their temporary base. The location provided excellent visibility of the valley below, while offering good concealment from enemy observation. Sarah helped establish their communication equipment and began setting up the high-powered spotting scopes they would use for surveillance. As now, dawn broke over the desert, Sarah got her first clear look at their target area. The valley spread out below them was dotted with cave entrances and rocky outcroppings that could easily conceal enemy positions. Through her binoculars, she could see signs of recent activity, including vehicle tracks and what appeared to be guard positions. "This is going to be interesting," muttered Corporal Thompson as he surveyed the scene. "A lot of places down there for hostiles to hide." Sergeant Jackson nodded grimly. "Which is exactly why we need to be thorough in our observations. Command is counting on us to provide accurate intelligence for the larger operation they're planning." What none of them realized at that moment was that their presence had not gone unnoticed, and that they would soon find themselves in a situation that would test not only Sarah's shooting skills, but her courage and determination in ways she had never imagined. The third day of surveillance started like the previous two. with Sarah and her teammates taking turns monitoring the valley below through their scopes and binoculars. They had documented significant enemy activity, including regular patrols, weapons movements, and what appeared to be a command structure operating from the largest cave complex. The intelligence they were gathering was proving invaluable, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Her instincts proved correct when Corporal Thompson, who was monitoring their radio communications, suddenly went rigid. He pressed his earpiece tighter and began rapidly taking notes, his expression growing more concerned with each passing moment. "Sergeant," Thompson called quietly to Jackson, "we've got a problem. Command is reporting that a convoy of our people was ambushed about 5 miles north of here. There are casualties, and they're requesting immediate sniper support to help with an extraction operation." Jackson moved quickly to Thompson's position and took the radio handset. Sarah could hear only one side of the conversation, but the tension in her sergeant's voice made it clear that the situation was serious. When he finished the call, Jackson gathered the team around him. "Here's what we know," he said, his voice low and urgent. "A supply convoy carrying medical personnel was hit by enemy forces. Several of our people are wounded and pinned down behind their vehicles. The enemy has them under fire from elevated positions, and our quick reaction force can't get close enough to help without taking heavy casualties themselves." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. This was the kind of situation she had trained for, but the reality of it was more intense than any simulation. "What do they need from us?" asked Rodriguez. "They need a sniper to eliminate the enemy positions that have our people pinned down. The shots are at extreme range, over 1,200 yards, which is beyond the effective range of standard equipment." Sarah realized immediately what Jackson was implying. The mission would require the kind of precision shooting that only specialized equipment could provide. She thought of the black Talon that the weapons instructor had shown them, and she wondered if it might be available for this operation. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "what about that specialized rifle we saw during training? The black Talon? Wouldn't that be exactly what's needed for this kind of mission?" Jackson looked at her with surprise. "Martinez, that weapon isn't something you just pick up and use. It requires extensive training and experience with long-range precision shooting." "I have that experience, Sergeant. I've been shooting at long distances since I was a child. My grandfather taught me everything about wind reading, ballistic compensation, and precision marksmanship." The rest of the team looked skeptical. Even though they had grown to respect Sarah's abilities, the idea of her taking on such a critical mission seemed to push beyond their comfort zone. Corporal Thompson shook his head. "No offense, Martinez, but this isn't target practice on your grandfather's ranch. We're talking about life or death shots under combat conditions. One miss could mean our people die." Sarah felt the familiar frustration rising in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "I understand the stakes, Corporal, but I also know my capabilities. I can make those shots." Jackson looked torn. He had seen Sarah's exceptional marksmanship during training, but he also understood the enormous pressure and responsibility that would come with this mission. After a moment of consideration, he made a decision. "I'm going to call command and see if the Black Talon is available. But Martinez, you need to understand that if I request you for this mission, there's no room for error. Lives depend on your accuracy." "I understand, Sergeant." The call to command took several tense minutes. Jackson explained the situation and requested both the specialized rifle and permission to use Sarah as their designated marksman for the mission. Sarah could tell from his side of the conversation that there was considerable debate on the other end of the line. Finally, Jackson concluded the call and turned back to the team. "Command is sending the Black Talon via helicopter, along with specialized ammunition and a spotter scope. But they made it clear that this is Sarah's show. If she's confident she can make the shots, they're willing to let her try." The helicopter arrived 30 minutes later, landing briefly in a clearing near their position. Along with the rifle case, the pilot delivered a senior non-commissioned officer whom Sarah had never seen before. The man was tall and lean, with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who had seen extensive combat. "I'm Master Sergeant Coleman," he announced to the assembled team. "I'm here as an observer and advisor for this mission. I've been using precision rifles for over 20 years, and Command wanted someone with experience to be present." Sarah felt her stomach clench. The implication was clear. They still didn't trust her to handle the mission on her own. Coleman seemed to sense her reaction and addressed her directly. "Private Martinez, I'm not here to take over your mission. From what I've heard, you have exceptional natural ability. But extreme long-range shooting under combat conditions is different from anything you've experienced before. I'm here to help ensure your success." When Coleman opened the rifle case, Sarah was struck again by the weapon's elegant beauty. This version looked even more sophisticated than the one she had handled during training, with additional modifications, and a scope that was clearly state-of-the-art. "This particular rifle has been customized for extreme accuracy," Coleman explained as he assembled the weapon. "The barrel has been hand-lapped, the trigger system has been precision-tuned, and the IA scope has been calibrated for the specific ammunition we're using today. In the right hands, this weapon can place shots within a 2-inch group at distances over a mile." As they prepared for the mission, Coleman walked Sarah through the advanced features of the rifle and scope system. He showed her how to adjust for wind speed and direction, how to compensate for air density and temperature, and how to read the terrain features that could affect bullet trajectory. "The most important thing to remember," Coleman said as they prepared to move to a better firing position, "is that at these extreme ranges, everything matters. A small change in wind direction, a slight error in range estimation, or even the way you breathe can affect your shot placement." The team moved to a rocky outcropping that provided a clear line of sight to the area where their people were pinned down. Through the high-powered scope, Sarah could see the disabled vehicles and the muzzle flashes from the enemy positions. The distance was indeed extreme, over 1,200 yards across difficult terrain. Coleman set up alongside her with a spotting scope, ready to help her read conditions and adjust her aim. "Take your time, Martinez. Study the situation, identify your targets, and don't rush your shots." Sarah settled into her firing position, feeling the familiar comfort of a precision rifle in her hands. Despite the pressure and the unfamiliarity of the combat situation, she found herself falling into the methodical mindset that her grandfather had taught her years earlier. She began to study the enemy positions, identifying the most critical targets, and planning her shooting sequence. The first target was an enemy machine gun position that was keeping the wounded soldiers pinned behind their vehicles. Sarah could see the muzzle flash clearly through her scope, and she began to calculate the shot. Wind speed, air density, range, and elevation all had to be factored into her aim point. "Target acquired," she reported quietly to Coleman. "Machine, gun position, approximately 1,250 yards." Coleman confirmed the range with his spotting equipment and helped her read the wind conditions. "Light crosswind from the east, maybe 3 to 4 miles per hour. Temperature is rising, so your bullet will fly slightly higher than standard." Sarah made her adjustments and settled into her final aiming position. Her breathing slowed, and the world seemed to narrow down to just her, the rifle, and the distant target. This was the moment she had trained for her entire life, the culmination of years of preparation and months of proving herself to skeptical superiors and teammates. As she applied pressure to the trigger, Sarah thought briefly of her grandfather and all the lessons he had taught her about precision, patience, and dedication. Then she focused entirely on the shot, letting her training and natural ability take over. The rifle's report echoed across the valley, a sharp crack that seemed to hang in the desert air. Sarah remained perfectly still, her eye pressed to the scope as she watched for the impact of her shot. Through the high-powered optic, she saw the enemy machine gunner suddenly slump forward, his weapon falling silent. "Target down," Coleman confirmed through his spotting scope, his voice carrying a note of surprise and respect. "Clean hit, center mass. Outstanding shot, Martinez." But there was no time for celebration. The convoy was still under fire from at least 2 other enemy positions, and the wounded soldiers remained in critical danger. Sarah had proven she could make the shot, but now she needed to demonstrate consistency under pressure. "Second target, sniper position in the rocks 1,100 yards, she called out, already shifting her aim to the next threat. This shot would be more challenging because the target was partially concealed behind rocky cover, presenting only a small portion of his body as a viable target. Coleman helped her read the wind conditions, which had shifted slightly since her first shot. Winds picked up, maybe 5 miles per hour from the southeast now. You'll need to adjust your hold accordingly. Sarah made the correction and settled into her shooting position again. This target required even more precision than the first, with only the enemy sniper's head and shoulders visible above the rocks. She controlled her breathing, let her natural shooting rhythm take over, and squeezed the trigger with the same steady pressure her grandfather had taught her years ago. The second shot was as accurate as the first. The enemy sniper's rifle fell, silent, and Sarah could see through her scope that the threat had been eliminated. From the convoy's position, she could see American soldiers beginning to move, taking advantage of the reduced enemy fire to help their wounded comrades. Another perfect shot, Coleman said, his tone now carrying genuine admiration. I've seen veteran snipers miss easier targets than these. How are you feeling? Ready for the next one, Sarah replied, already scanning for additional threats. The third enemy position proved to be the most challenging yet. The shooter was positioned in a cave entrance, deeply shadowed and presenting an extremely small target profile. The range was over 1,300 yards, pushing even the Black Talon's capabilities to their limits. This one's going to be tough, Coleman warned. The target is barely visible and the range is at the extreme end of what this rifle can handle. Effectively. Sarah studied the position through her scope, waiting patiently for the enemy shooter to present a clear target. Her teammates watched in tense silence as she maintained her position, unwavering in her focus despite the pressure of the situation. Minutes passed before the enemy soldier shifted position, exposing just enough of his torso for Sarah to have a viable target. She had only seconds before he would likely move back into concealment. Without hesitation, Sarah adjusted her aim point for the extreme range and fired. The bullet's flight time at this distance was nearly 2 seconds, an eternity. In combat situations, she held her breath as she watched through the scope, waiting to see if her calculations had been correct. The distant figure suddenly jerked and fell backward into the cave. The shooting from that position ceased immediately. Incredible, Coleman muttered. That was a 1 in 1,000 shot, even for an experienced sniper. You just eliminated 3 enemy positions at ranges that most marksmen couldn't even attempt. Down in the valley, the rescue operation was now proceeding rapidly. With the enemy suppression eliminated, medical personnel were able to reach the wounded soldiers and begin evacuation procedures. Sarah watched through her scope as helicopters arrived to extract the casualties, her part in saving their lives filling her with a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she had ever experienced. As they prepared to return to their observation, Post Coleman approached Sarah with an expression of genuine respect. Private, I owe you an apology. When Command asked me to observe this mission, I assumed I'd be taking over the shooting. I've never seen natural ability like yours, especially under this kind of pressure. Thank you, Master Sergeant. My grandfather always said that accuracy under pressure was the true test of a marksman. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. Where did he learn to shoot like that? Vietnam, Sarah replied. He was a sniper with the Marines. He always told me that precision shooting was as much about mental discipline as physical skill. Coleman nodded knowingly. He was right, and he'd be very proud of what you accomplished today. The helicopter extraction of the wounded soldiers was completed successfully, with all casualties evacuated to medical facilities. The after-action reports would later credit Sarah's marksmanship with preventing what could have been a much more tragic outcome. But for now, the team still had their original mission to complete. Over the following 2 days, they continued their surveillance of the enemy cave complex, gathering additional intelligence about troop movements and weapons stockpiles. Sarah's confidence had grown enormously following her successful long-range shooting, and she found that her teammates now treated her with the same respect they showed each other. Sergeant Jackson pulled her aside during one of their rest periods. Martinez, I want you to know that what you did yesterday changed everything. Not just for this mission, but for how Command views your capabilities. They're already talking about additional specialized training opportunities. I appreciate that, Sergeant, but I just want to be the best soldier I can be for this team. You already are. And I'm recommending you for commendation when we get back to base. The mission concluded successfully, with the team gathering comprehensive intelligence that would prove crucial for subsequent operations. When they returned to their forward operating base, Sarah was surprised to find that word of her shooting had already spread throughout the unit. Captain Williams was waiting for them at the debriefing. His expression was markedly different from their first meeting, showing genuine respect rather than skepticism. "Private Martinez, I've received some very impressive reports about your performance. Master Sergeant Coleman's assessment was particularly noteworthy." "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." "No, Private, you were doing much more than that. You were proving that talent and dedication matter more than preconceived notions about who can and cannot excel in combat operations." The captain paused and seemed to be considering his next words carefully. "I have some news that might interest you. Division Command has been developing a new specialized sniper program, and they're looking for candidates with exceptional natural ability and proven performance under combat conditions. Your name has been submitted for consideration." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. A specialized sniper program would represent the ultimate validation of her skills and dedication. It would also mean leaving her current team, which had become like a family to her. "What would that involve, sir?" "Advanced training with the most sophisticated equipment available, working with elite units on the most critical missions. It's an opportunity that very few soldiers ever receive." "I'd be honored to be considered, sir." As Sarah left the captain's office, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few short months. She had gone from being dismissed and underestimated to being recognized as one of the most skilled marksmen in her unit. The journey had been challenging, often frustrating, but ultimately rewarding in ways she had never imagined. That evening, she sat alone in her quarters, cleaning and maintaining the black Talon rifle that had become her trusted companion. The weapon represented more than just sophisticated equipment. It symbolized the opportunity she had been given to prove herself and the responsibility that came with her unique abilities. She thought about her grandfather and the lessons he had taught her about precision, patience, and perseverance. He had always believed in her potential, even when others doubted. Now, as she prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, she felt ready to honor his faith in her and continue pushing the boundaries of what others thought possible. The specialized sniper program would bring new challenges and opportunities, but Sarah was confident that her foundation of skill, determination, and unwavering commitment to excellence would serve her well. She had proven that talent and dedication could overcome prejudice and skepticism, and she was ready to continue that journey wherever it might lead. 6 months later, Sarah stood at attention in a small briefing room at Fort Campbell, home to some of the military's most elite units. The advanced marksmanship program had pushed her skills to levels she had never imagined possible. She could now consistently hit targets at distances exceeding 2,000 yards, operate in any weather condition, and function effectively as part of highly specialized teams. The training had been intense beyond anything she had experienced before. Her days began before dawn with physical conditioning that made her previous training seem easy by comparison. She had learned advanced ballistics, meteorology, and even basic engineering to better understand how environmental factors affected bullet trajectory. Most importantly, she had been paired with experienced snipers who had taught her the psychological aspects of precision shooting under extreme stress. Her instructor for the program had been Master Sergeant Coleman, who had requested to work with her after witnessing her performance during the convoy rescue operation. Under his guidance, Sarah had developed from a naturally gifted marksman into a truly professional sniper, capable of operating in any environment. The difference between a good shooter and a great sniper, Coleman had told her during one of their training sessions, is the ability to make critical shots when everything is going wrong around you. Equipment failure, bad weather, enemy fire, wounded teammates, that's when your true skills are tested. Now, as she waited for her final assignment briefing, Sarah reflected on how much she had grown not just as a marksman, but as a soldier and a person. The skepticism and doubt that had once seemed to follow her everywhere had been replaced by respect and recognition. Her fellow snipers, all of them experienced veterans, treated her as an equal and valued team member. The briefing room door opened and Colonel Harrison entered with a folder of classified documents. Sarah had met the colonel only once before, during her initial interview for the program. He was a legendary figure in special operations, with a reputation for leading the most challenging missions. Congratulations on completing the advanced marksmanship program, Sergeant Martinez, the colonel said, using her newly promoted rank. Your instructors tell me that you've exceeded every expectation they had for your development. Thank you, sir. The training has been an incredible opportunity. I hope you feel that way, because I have something that will put everything you've learned to the test. We have a situation developing overseas that requires a sniper with your particular combination of skills and experience. The colonel opened his folder and spread several photographs and maps across the table. Sarah could see that they depicted a mountainous region with what appeared to be a fortified compound nestled among the peaks. Intelligence indicates that a high-value target has taken refuge in this location, Colonel Harrison explained. He's responsible for coordinating attacks against our forces and civilian populations. Standard assault operations aren't feasible due to the terrain and the civilian presence in the surrounding area. Sarah studied the photographs carefully. The target location was clearly chosen for its defensive advantages, with steep approaches and excellent fields of observation. Any conventional attack would be extremely costly and likely to fail. What's the proposed solution, sir? A precision elimination from extreme range. The shot would have to be made from this ridgeline, he pointed to a position on the map, at a distance of approximately 2,300 yards. The target appears briefly on this balcony each morning, but only for a few seconds. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. 2,300 yards was at the very edge of what was considered possible. Even with the most advanced equipment available, the shot would require perfect conditions and flawless execution. Sir, that's an extremely challenging shot. What's the margin for error? None, the colonel replied bluntly. You get one opportunity. If you miss, the target will disappear, probably, permanently. And our intelligence suggests he's planning something significant that could cost many lives. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a familiar burden. Throughout her career, she had faced moments where accuracy meant the difference between life and death. But this felt different. The stakes were higher, the challenges more extreme. Who else is being considered for this mission, sir? Colonel Harrison looked at her directly. No one else. Based on your performance record, your psychological profile, and your demonstrated ability to perform under extreme pressure, you're our first and only choice for this operation. Sarah felt a moment of doubt creep into her mind. Despite all her training and experience, the idea of being solely responsible for such a critical mission was daunting. But then she remembered her grandfather's words about rising to meet challenges, and her own journey from a dismissed recruit to a respected sniper. When do I deploy, sir? 48 hours. You'll be inserted with a small support team, but the actual shot will be yours alone. Master Sergeant Coleman will accompany you as your spotter, along with 2 other soldiers for security. Over the next 2 days, Sarah prepared intensively for the mission. She studied detailed topographical maps, weather patterns, and intelligence reports about the target area. She also spent hours with the specialized rifle that had been custom-built for this operation, a weapon that represented the pinnacle of precision engineering. The rifle was similar to the black Talon she had used before, but modified even further for extreme long-range accuracy. Every component had been hand-selected and precision-fitted. The scope was a masterpiece of optical engineering, capable of clearly resolving targets at distances that would have been impossible just a few years earlier. This weapon is capable of accuracy that most people would consider impossible, the weapons technician explained as he showed Sarah the rifle's features. But it's only as good as the person behind it. At 2,300 yards, even a tiny error in technique will result in a complete miss. The flight to the deployment zone took 18 hours, with multiple stops for refueling and mission updates. During the journey, Sarah found herself thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. From a small-town girl who loved shooting with her grandfather to a soldier entrusted with one of the military's most critical missions, the transformation still seemed surreal. Coleman sat beside her during the flight, reviewing last-minute details and offering encouragement. You know, Martinez, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I've never seen anyone with your natural ability combined with your work ethic. If anyone can make this shot, it's you. I just hope I'm worthy of the confidence everyone has placed in me. You've already proven that. Remember, this is just another shot. All the fundamentals are the same whether you're shooting at 100 yards or 2,300. Trust your training, trust your equipment, and trust yourself. The insertion went smoothly, with the team reaching their designated position under cover of darkness. The shooting location was a rocky outcropping that provided excellent concealment, while offering a clear line of sight to the target area. Sarah set up her rifle with methodical precision, checking and double-checking every adjustment. As dawn approached, she settled into her final shooting position with Coleman beside her at the spotting scope. The target building was barely visible, in the distance, looking more like a toy structure than a real place where people lived and worked. Target area is in sight, Coleman reported quietly. Range is 2,310 yards. Wind is light and variable, mostly from the west at 2 to 3 miles per hour. Sarah adjusted her scope settings and began the mental preparation that had become second nature to her. She controlled her breathing, relaxed her muscles, and focused entirely on the task ahead. In the distance, through her scope, she could see the balcony where intelligence indicated the target would appear. At exactly the predicted time, a figure emerged onto the balcony. Even through her powerful scope, he appeared tiny and indistinct. Sarah had only seconds to confirm the target, make her final adjustments, and take the shot that would determine the success or failure of the entire operation. This was the moment that all her training, all her experience, and all her natural ability had prepared her for. As she applied pressure to the trigger, Sarah felt the same calm confidence that had guided her through every challenging shot of her career. Her grandfather's lessons, her determination to prove herself, and her commitment to excellence all came together in this single, critical moment. The shot that followed would become legendary within military circles, talked about in training courses, and used as an example of what was possible when skill, preparation, and determination combined with the right equipment and conditions. But for Sarah, it was simply the culmination of a journey that had begun with a young girl and her grandfather practicing on a Texas ranch, proving once and for all that dedication and talent could overcome any obstacle.